The rain in Port Maven didn't fall, it whispered. It whispered through the eaves of the old houses that leaned toward one another like elders in quiet conversation. It tapped on windows as if asking to be let in, reminding the inhabitants that no matter how much they tried to shut the world out, it always found its way back. Nira Holden had grown used to that sound. In fact, she depended on it. Her bookstore, Holden's Pages, sat at the corner of Wren Street and Coastal Lane, a crooked little place with warped floorboards and the smell of aged paper soaked into every wooden beam. It had been her sanctuary for 6 years, since the day she left the city behind with only a suitcase, her grandmother's tea set, and a heart she tried to sew back together using silence as thread. On most days, Nira opened the shop at 10, steeped herself a cup of lavender tea, and unlocked the small glass case where she kept the older, rarer volumes, poetry bound in cloth, love letters between war-separated lovers, one-off novellas that ended in heartbreak and hope in equal measure. The town itself was the kind that tourists often passed through without noticing, save for the lighthouse perched high above the cliffs or the scent of sea salt and rosemary that drifted from the bakeries on tide-heavy mornings. But for those who stayed, those who called Port Maven home, there was a rhythm to life that the rest of the world seemed to have forgotten. It was slower, quieter, filled with rituals no one quite remembered the origins of. One such ritual was the rainy Thursday serenade. Nira didn't know who started it. All she knew was that 3 months ago, a violinist began to play outside her bookstore every Thursday, rain or not, but more often rain. He would stand just outside the awning near the cast-iron bench, lean his tall figure slightly forward as if bowed by the weight of his own sound, and begin to play. He never introduced himself. Never spoke. Just played. The music wasn't showy. It didn't ask for attention. It simply existed, like a memory unearthed slowly from beneath layers of silt and sleep. The melodies weren't classical either. They didn't belong to any era Nira could name. They were fragmented and aching, beautiful in a way that left no space for conversation. They reminded her of the way love felt when you were too afraid to say it out loud. The first time she noticed him, he wore a dark coat too thin for the season and boots caked with mud as though he'd walked from somewhere very far away. His hair was dark, long enough to curl at his collar, and damp from the drizzle that refused to let up even once that afternoon. She watched from behind the stacks, unsure whether to approach or pretend not to notice. Her hands shook as she pretended to arrange the books near the window display. But every note he played struck something raw in her. It was as though her ribs were tuned like strings and he had found the one chord that made them vibrate. She told no one. Instead, she let the ritual build itself, quietly. Every Thursday, she began leaving the front window slightly cracked, just enough for the music to sneak in with the rain. She moved the reading chair closer. Made herself a cup of jasmine tea instead of lavender on those days, for reasons she couldn't explain. And then, without understanding why, she placed a blank journal by the counter. A place for strangers to write if they wanted. No one had for weeks. Until one Thursday, after the violinist played a piece that made her ache, she found a note in the journal. Rain does not forget where it has fallen. That was all it said. No signature. No flourish. Just those words. Clean and clear. It was written in neat cursive, tight loops and deliberate strokes. Something about the handwriting stirred her memory, but the feeling was like a name you forget while saying it. There, and then gone. She almost tore the page out. Almost convinced herself it was nothing. But something inside told her to leave it. So she did. And the next week, another line appeared beneath the first. If I had strings instead of veins, would you still hear my heart? That's when she knew, it was him. The musician. After that, it became something unspoken. An exchange built on invisible threads and sound. He played. She listened. He left words. She never responded, not on paper. But she began to wear her grandmother's blue shawl on Thursdays, the one she used to wear during rainy days in college. She began humming the melody he played each time she brewed tea. She rearranged her schedule so that her Thursdays were quiet, as if making space for something sacred. Still, they never spoke. Not until the snow fell. It was early December when the first snowfall arrived, wet and heavy, the kind that made the town look like it had been dipped in dreams. The roads were emptying, the lighthouse's beam cut through the mist like a watchful eye, and the sea moaned in the distance like an old lover calling out a name long forgotten. That Thursday, he played again. Only this time, Neera opened the door. She didn't plan to. She just did. Maybe it was the music, lower, sadder than usual. Or maybe it was the way he looked that day, his hands trembling slightly, his breath visible in the cold, his violin bow worn down like it had been played too long. She stepped into the doorway, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "Would you like to come in?" she asked softly. He stopped playing, the last note fading into the snow-laced air. He turned to her. And for a moment, his eyes met hers, and widened, just slightly. There was something sharp in the way he looked at her. Not recognition, exactly. More like sorrow wrapped in surprise. "I shouldn't," he said after a long pause. His voice was low, deep, and strangely familiar. She tilted her head. "Do we know each other?" A ghost of a smile passed across his lips. "Not anymore. But we might have, once." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the fog and flurries like a story retreating from being told. Neera stood in the doorway for a long time. Her breath hung in the cold like a question that had no one to answer it. She was about to step back inside when she noticed something. His violin case. He had left it. Or perhaps left it on purpose. It sat open on the bench, not empty, but not full of coins either. Inside, nestled beneath the velvet lining, was a letter. One she recognized immediately. Her own handwriting stared back at her. To Luca. Her breath caught. Her knees weakened. She hadn't written that name in over 7 years. 7 years earlier. There had been another rainstorm. Another small coastal town. And another life entirely. Neera had been 23, fresh out of college and dreaming of travel and translation work. Luca had been the boy who played guitar under train platforms. The boy who quoted Neruda like it was scripture. The boy who once told her she was a silence he wanted to fill with music. They had lived in an apartment above a record shop that always smelled like burnt coffee and vinyl sleeves. They shared everything, dreams, fears, songs, poems. And then, one day, he left. No explanation. No note. Just, gone. She wrote him letters. Dozens. Some angry. Some pleading. All unanswered. Until finally, she wrote the last one. To Luca. It had been the only one she never sent. And now, somehow, it was here. Unopened. In his violin case. As if the past had found her. As if silence had circled back. Neera stood in her bookstore, clutching the letter, her hands trembling. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the street in white. The town had gone quiet, save for the distant toll of the lighthouse bell and the hum of wind against glass. She didn't open the letter. Not yet. Instead, she looked to the journal. On the latest page was a final line. Even in silence, I waited. The snow always made Luca feel like he was walking through an old film reel, grainy, too quiet, suspended in time. He watched his breath curl in front of him, clouding the air as he leaned against the bench just outside Halden's pages, violin case at his feet. His hands, even gloved, ached from the cold. But he didn't stop playing. Not yet. He never played for coins. Never for applause. He played for her. He'd seen her watching him through the window since the first week. Always behind the display with the older poetry books. Wrapped in that faded blue shawl. Sometimes pretending to read. Other times just, still. Listening. Neera. Even after 7 years, her name stirred things inside him he thought he'd buried too deep to reach. Like finding a photograph inside a forgotten coat pocket. A name you whispered in your sleep without knowing. He hadn't meant to come back. Port Maven wasn't even on the map he'd followed north. He was chasing storms, drifting town to town, surviving by music and memory. But when the rain started falling hard one late September evening and his train was delayed, he'd walked out of the station and found the coast. Found her town. He didn't realize it was her town until he passed the bookstore. Halden's Pages. Her name, carved in wooden letters, sitting quietly like a secret that never forgot how to breathe. He told himself he'd only pass through. But he didn't. He came every Thursday. He played because he didn't know what else to do. It was the only language they had left between them. And when he saw her step outside last week and offer him shelter, something in him split open. He'd barely spoken the words, "I didn't expect, you." Because he hadn't. Because how do you look someone in the eye after vanishing without goodbye? How do you confess that silence wasn't abandonment, but fear? Worse, shame. He still remembered the last night they'd shared. In that dim apartment above the record store, with vinyl stacked on the floor and 2 mugs of chamomile tea growing cold. She had curled into his chest like she belonged there. Like she had finally trusted the future they'd painted in pieces. And he had already known he wouldn't stay. Not because he wanted to leave. But because life had a way of tearing apart the soft things. His father's cancer diagnosis had come like a thunderclap. A midnight call. The kind that feels unreal until you hear your mother crying on the other end, telling you he'd stopped responding to treatment. Luca left the next day. Without telling Neera. Without explaining. Just, ran. He couldn't watch someone else he loved die. And after his father passed, the silence stretched. Too wide to bridge. Too late to cross. He tried to write to her. But the words always felt like sand in his throat. He'd written a letter he never mailed, the letter. The one that now sat folded in her hands, in the violin case he'd left on purpose. He watched her through the frost-laced shop window as she lifted it. She hadn't opened it. But she held it like something sacred. Something fragile. Her fingers, small and pale, curled around the edges. He left before she could look up. Not out of cowardice, but because if she saw him then, and her eyes carried hate instead of memory, he didn't know if he could survive it. That night, Luca didn't sleep. The boarding house on Sandal Street where he rented a single room was drafty, the radiator too old to do more than cough and groan. His violin rested near the window, and the letter she now held was no longer with him. He kept picturing her face. Older now. Softer. But still her. She'd let her hair grow long. It used to be just above her shoulders, often tucked behind her ears while she read. Now it fell in dark waves down her back, held in place by a silver pin. Her eyes were the same though, quiet but expressive. The kind that held entire chapters in a single glance. He sat at his desk and pulled out a new sheet of parchment, the kind he bought from a street market in Kestrin 2 towns back. And he wrote. Neera. I didn't know you would be here. I didn't even know I was coming back to you, not really. My feet just kept moving and the rain led me here. You probably hate me. You probably should. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I didn't know how to be the man you saw in me, not when everything was crumbling back home. Not when the person I looked up to most in the world was dying and I couldn't save him. But I should have told you. I should have given you the dignity of an explanation. A goodbye. A last, I love you. You waited on the stairs, didn't you? I've dreamed about that. You on the lighthouse steps. Holding that blue shawl like it could shield you from the ache. I played the violin for you because it was the only way I could talk again. If you open the letter in the case, it'll tell you what I never said aloud. But if you don't, if you burn it, I won't blame you. Still, I'll be at the lighthouse Saturday night. Like before. If you come, I'll wait. If you don't, I'll go. But this time, I'll say goodbye the right way. Luca. He folded the letter carefully, placed it into a blue envelope, and addressed it simply. Nira Holden, Holden's Pages. He didn't need a stamp. He'd leave it under her door before dawn. 2 days later, Saturday night. The wind was merciless on the cliffside path, whipping Luca's coat behind him like wings. The lighthouse loomed ahead, its light slicing through the fog like a tired sentinel that never gave up its post. He remembered how she used to sit on the steps, legs tucked beneath her, book in hand, her shawl around her shoulders like a banner of hope. He remembered the kisses shared just behind the rusted railing. He remembered the way she once said, "This place makes me believe love might actually outlast time." He reached the top. Waited. The minutes stretched. The wind howled. The sea below crashed and called, impatient. And then a figure in blue appeared at the edge of the path. Nira. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She just walked. As if she was returning to a story she never stopped reading. When she reached him, they stood in silence. The rain had stopped. The snow had melted. Only mist remained. "I read it," she said. "The letter?" he asked. "All of them." He blinked. There was only one. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small bundle, faded paper, tied with a ribbon. "I kept writing. Even when you didn't answer. I just never mailed them." He smiled, faint but true. "I guess we both sent our words into the void." She looked up at him, her eyes wet but unbroken. "Why now, Luca?" "Because I couldn't keep pretending music was enough. Because some echoes deserve to become voices again." A long pause stretched between them. Then, slowly, carefully, she reached out and took his hand. "I never stopped hearing you," she whispered. And for the first time in 7 years, he smiled the way he used to, softly, like a sunrise breaking through clouded memory. They sat on the steps together in silence, the lighthouse spinning its slow, eternal light behind them. And in the stillness, neither asked for promises. They only allowed the past to breathe. Because sometimes, love doesn't need a perfect path. Just the courage to return. Seraph Vane never intended to stay in Port Maven this long. What was supposed to be a 2-week visit, just enough time to clear out her late aunt's home and maybe write a short column about the town's dying fishing culture, had turned into 2 months of quiet mornings, damp notebooks, and a haunting sense that something important waited just out of reach. Port Maven had a way of doing that. The town got under your skin. The fog, the rain, the ever-present sea. It didn't just wash over you. It soaked in. And now Seraph was tangled in something she didn't entirely understand. It started with the lighthouse archive room. The small, dusty museum at the base of the cliffs mostly catered to passing tourists, old sailors' journals, rusted equipment, black and white photos of shipwrecks. She went there for background on a local story. What she found instead was a drawer filled with unsent letters, all written in the same voice, elegant, aching, and unmailed. Most were addressed only to Luca. Seraph wasn't nosy by nature. But the handwriting stopped her. Because she recognized it. Nira. They hadn't spoken in almost 5 years, not since the fight that tore their friendship in half. Back then, Nira had vanished overnight, leaving a farewell note and a trail of broken connections. Seraph remembered being furious. And confused. She remembered writing emails that went unanswered. She remembered standing outside Holden's Pages once, hoping for an explanation, but never finding the courage to go inside. Now, she held pieces of that lost time in her hands. The letters weren't just sad. They were intimate. They told a story she'd never heard. You once said silence could be a form of love. I didn't believe you then. But I think I understand now. There were dozens of them. Some angry. Some poetic. Some so raw Sarah felt like she was eavesdropping on something sacred. She copied down the return address listed on one of the envelopes. Not the bookstore, but an older address. A cottage on Driftwood Lane that Sarah knew well. Her aunt's place. Her own now. The idea unsettled her. Had Nira and Luca's story somehow crossed into her family's orbit without her knowing? She folded the letters gently and replaced them. But something inside her shifted. This wasn't just a curiosity anymore. This was a story that needed to be heard. Later that day, Driftwood Lane. Sarah sat at her aunt's old kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring at the attic hatch in the ceiling. She didn't believe in fate. Not really. But something had led her here. She stood, pulled down the creaking ladder, and climbed. The attic was filled with the usual relics, boxes, dusty coats, stacks of books. But in the corner, beneath a moth-eaten quilt, was a battered wooden trunk. The kind people used to carry across oceans. Inside, she found more letters. These were different. Older. Yellowed by time. One in particular caught her eye. The name Luca Marine scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting, but the return address was Port Maven. Carefully, she unfolded it. Luca. I saw her again today. She doesn't know who I am. I don't think she even knows you ever wrote back. I burned the letter before she could see it. You should have left things buried. E.R. Sarah frowned. The handwriting was sharper, almost panicked. She had no idea who E.R. was, but whoever they were, they hadn't wanted Luca and Nira to reconnect. And yet, here they were. She remembered seeing Nira just 2 nights ago at the lighthouse. With someone. Someone with a violin case. That evening, local cafe. Sarah sipped her drink slowly, watching the snow flurry past the window. She had her notebook open, filled with fragments. Nira equals bookstore owner. Luca equals disappeared 7 years ago. Violinist in town equals Luca. Letters never sent, but one returned. ER equals. Someone tried to keep them apart. A bell jingled. She looked up, and her breath caught. It was him. She knew instantly. The way he walked. The way he carried silence like a second skin. He moved like someone haunted. And yet, his eyes, dark, searching, held something unbroken. She waited until he ordered a tea and took a seat by the window before she approached. Luca? She asked gently. He looked up, startled. Yes. I'm Seraph. Nira's, she hesitated. Friend. Or I was. Something softened in his expression. She talks about you. She doesn't talk about much anymore. He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. I found some of your letters, she said. In the archives. Some in a trunk. You never sent them. Only one, he admitted. The rest never made it out of me. And the letter she never got. Her tone shifted. Someone burned it. He blinked. Seraph slid the photograph she'd taken of the note across the table. The one from ER. He stared at it. And went still. I gave that letter to someone I trusted, he said slowly. Someone who said they'd make sure she got it. Do you know who ER is? Luca looked out the window, jaw clenched. Emery Reese. Who's that? He hesitated. Her cousin. Sarah felt her blood chill. Why would he burn it? He always thought I wasn't good enough for her. Thought I'd ruin her the way her father ruined her mother. You were gone for 7 years. I didn't want to be, he said, and his voice cracked, barely, but enough. I was grieving. And by the time I could come back, I didn't know how. Seraph leaned back, thinking. What are you going to do now? I gave her the letter. I told her I'd be at the lighthouse. And she came. Seraph smiled. Then maybe fate isn't just a word in poetry. Luca gave a small laugh. She used to say fate was just love with good timing. The next morning, Halden's pages. Seraph finally gathered the courage to walk into the bookstore. Mira looked up from behind the counter. For a long second, they simply stared at each other. Hi, Seraph said. Hi. I'm sorry, they both said at the same time, and laughed. The years melted a little. I found your letters, Seraph said softly. I know, Mira replied. I left them there. Why? In case I ever forgot why I loved him. A pause. Then Seraph whispered, you still do, don't you? Mira nodded. Seraph reached into her coat and pulled out one final letter. Not from the archives. One she'd written herself. To Mira, the front read. A reconciliation. A bridge. A way back. Mira took it with trembling hands. Thank you. They didn't say much after that. Didn't need to. Sometimes, old friendships just needed to be unboxed, like forgotten letters in attic trunks. And maybe, like love, they were always waiting to be opened. Ezra Rain hadn't touched a letter in 5 years. Not since his hands began to tremble too much to trust the handwriting. He used to pride himself on delivering more than mail, he delivered memories, reconciliations, truths. That's what letters were, after all. Private truths wrapped in paper and hope. But now, Ezra spent most of his days watching the rain slide down the glass of his seaside cottage. He drank too much tea. Listened to too many jazz records. And pretended that the past didn't still knock on his door when the wind blew just right. But this week, something had knocked. A face. A voice. A name. He saw him in the cafe, the boy with the violin. Except he wasn't a boy anymore. Taller. Thinner. Worn from the world. Ezra had almost forgotten his name. Luca Marine. He remembered the last time he saw him. A soaked teenager, shaking from something deeper than cold, holding a sealed envelope addressed. To Mira Halden. Please give this to her. She'll know. She has to know. Ezra remembered the weight of it. Not just in his hand, but in the way Luca spoke. As if the letter was the only part of him brave enough to stay. And he remembered what happened next. The knock on his door that same night. A different boy. Emery Reese. Mira's cousin. Clean-cut, smooth-talking. Full of charm and vinegar. Ezra had never liked him. Emery had smiled wide and said, "Hey, I need to intercept something before it causes trouble." And Ezra, tired, distracted, trusting the family name, had handed it over. Only to later find the envelope burned behind the post office. And Luca? Gone. Ezra never forgave himself. He had no proof. No confrontation. Just a pile of ash and an ache he couldn't explain to anyone. Present day. The lighthouse blinked through the mist, the beam cutting slow arcs over the water. Ezra stood on the cliffs again, his scarf pulled tight, his walking stick steadying him against the wind. He had come here every week for years. Out of guilt. Out of longing. But tonight, something felt different. Below, near the steps, he saw 2 figures. Mira. Luca. Sitting shoulder to shoulder. Quiet. Close. Together. He smiled. Maybe he hadn't failed entirely. The next day, post office archives. Ezra pushed open the old back door of the now unused Port Maven post office. Dust clung to everything. Shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten letters, mail never claimed, mail never sent. He moved slowly, deliberately, toward the wooden drawer labeled miscellaneous, return to sender. He was looking for something he hadn't dared face in years. And there it was. A second letter. Unopened. Addressed in Luca's hand. To Nira Holden. If you're reading this, it means I failed to say goodbye the right way. But I want you to know, every song I've written since I left was for you. Ezra stared at it, heart pounding. This letter had never been mailed. Not burned. Hidden. Misfiled. Forgotten by accident, or maybe by some part of Ezra that didn't want to believe he'd been tricked by Emery. With shaking fingers, he tucked the envelope into his coat pocket and stepped into the cold. That afternoon, Holden's pages. Ezra stood at the counter, clearing his throat. Nira looked up, eyes wide with recognition and confusion. Ezra, she said softly. It's been too long, he said, managing a small smile. I won't take much of your time. Just, found something that belongs to you. He placed the envelope gently in front of her. She looked down. Her breath caught. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. This was. Ezra nodded. I think it got lost. And I think you deserve to read it now. Nira's eyes filled with something too full to name. She held the letter to her chest like a returning heartbeat. Thank you, she whispered. Ezra turned to leave. But before the bell above the door jingled, she called out, Why now? He paused, hand on the frame. Because I saw you at the lighthouse, he said. And I remembered something I tried to forget, some things don't stay buried. Not forever. She smiled, small but honest. You want to stay for tea? He hesitated. Then nodded. Only if it's Jasmine. That night, the lighthouse, again. Luca returned to the place their paths had mended. He stood alone this time, violin in hand. He didn't play. He just watched the waves, breathing in the stillness. And then, she appeared again. Nira. Blue shawl. Windswept hair. Eyes full of stories. She held the letter in her hands. I read it, she said. I meant every word, Luca replied. She stepped closer. I never knew you tried, she said. I thought you gave up. I didn't. But someone else did for me. I know. Another step. Then another. Then suddenly, they were dancing. No music. No crowd. Just the slow, swaying rhythm of their breath and memory, their arms finding the shape they once knew. She rested her head on his chest. He held her like he'd found the rest of himself. And beneath the lighthouse's turning eye, in the place their love was born and nearly buried, they moved like the past had never broken them. The lighthouse waltz. Once again.